Welcome everyone to the Cyber Race podcast. Today we are diving into cloud security, identity abuse, and how real-world attackers are actually compromising modern environments. I am joined today by Ian Austin, the founder and CEO of Pond Labs, who focuses on hands-on cloud security training based on real attack paths across cloud, AI, SaaS, and hybrid environments. Ian, it's great to have you with us here today.
Fatima, thank you for the invite. It's great to be here on the Cyberways podcast. And yeah, we've got lots to discuss.
Yes, it's very exciting session. So thank you so much. We can now kick off with the first question. Yes. So there's a lot of discussion around cloud security tools and frameworks. So from your perspective, if attackers were targeting modern cloud environment today, where would they really start and why?
That's a really good question. So where would threat actors start if they wanted to get into cloud? Well, I guess the first thing to say is that there are many ways into the cloud. One of the ways is phishing. So there's in on-premises environments, there's a network perimeter in the cloud. You also have an IAM perimeter. So these are where you have credentials you can set and you can use those credentials from anywhere in the world, right? Companies, if they're kind of improving their security posture, may look to harden their network perimeter and IAM perimeter, hopefully. What threat actors would look to do is to bypass the perimeter completely and target the human layer. And then from there, they can steal tokens, they can steal credentials, and get access to cloud environments. What can also happen is secrets. Even in this day and age, developers leak secrets to repositories. I'd say GitHub have done a lot of improvements here, so it's actually harder to leak secrets to GitHub. But platforms such as GitLab and others also, it's still possible. And what threat actors are doing always is they're continually scanning all the code repositories in the world. And we can imagine that within a few seconds of us having committed a secret, let's say, AWS access keys or something like that to a repository, the threat actor already has them. And so this is a very common way that threat actors look to get access to the cloud also. Another way is password spraying. So we may hope that in this day and age, with companies moving to hybrid cloud architectures, actually, is password spraying still an issue? And yes, it is. I'd say with Google, Google's identity is formidable, and it's very hard to password spray against Google Workspace users, but it's absolutely still possible. For AWS, if a company is using traditional IAM users like legacy IAM, then it's very easy to password spray. And a lot of the time they don't have MFA set up for that. So instead of using IAM users, AWS customers should use Identity Center, which is harder. Microsoft also has some pretty tough kind of AI and ML in the back end, looking at user risk and stuff like that. But even with that said, password spraying is still a valid, technique that threat actors look to get into the cloud. And even 2 years ago, Microsoft had a breach where someone actually gained access to their infrastructure, first by performing a password spray attack. There's many different ways, to be honest.
It's really interesting.
For a security leader, there's so much to keep in mind about how to prevent the bad guys getting access.
Yeah, I think it could be like what makes them awake at night. Like it probably is the first thing that makes their job harder.
Right.
To predict what the attackers would be doing, where would they be doing, and to make sure that any attack surface within the environment is secured enough. It could be some kind of a puzzle that they need to solve, and it's ever unsolvable.
Exactly. And there's also, you highlighted a really interesting point about the asymmetry. So it's like threat actors only need one opportunity. Defenders only need to make one mistake. Okay. And so there's that kind of, it's like an unfair game almost.
It is, yeah. So would you say that it is less about breaking in and more about abusing what's already existing?
Is it less about breaking in and more about abusing what's already existing? So that's a really interesting point. I think for sure, if you just have a vanilla cloud environment and you've set up your federated users and stuff like that, of course, it's going to be a challenge to get access. If you have any resources deployed, let's say, for example, we have an application that's deployed and all of a sudden, you're not relying on cloud only, you're relying on the application security. You've got your authentication of the application. Maybe the application uses like optional JWT authentication. What that means is that when you try and access a page, maybe let's say a dashboard, instead of instead of you being taken straight to the login page, it kind of redirects you to the login page. But first, before it does that, it will actually return the source code of the application. So if there's like some sort of application that has some secrets and those secrets aren't being stored very securely,
Yeah.
then, as a threat actor, what they could do is, or a red team emulating those threat actors, they could intercept the initial request and before the redirect, retrieve all the source code for the application. So, and then gain access to the cloud from there. So that's just one example where, yeah, absolutely. If you deploy resources to the cloud, it can help threat actors to gain a foothold potentially. So we need to be really, really mindful of that.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. I think it's very insightful. So we are excited to get to know more. I think we should move on to the next question. So many organizations feel confident in their cloud security posture. They've invested a lot of tools in a lot of compliance frameworks and certifications. But the question is, why do so many cloud security programs look strong on paper, but fall apart during real-world attacks?
Yeah, good question. Incredible amounts of money are being spent on tooling, on training, assessments as well. But you're right, there is like this sort of disconnect between how much is actually being spent. And then when it comes to a real life attack, actually we see a lot of environments are kind of not able to detect very quickly a threat actor. They're not able to detect sometimes for weeks or months. And that comes down to a few reasons, I think. There's probably quite a few reasons, but I'd say one of them is a lack of actual validation of the controls under real conditions. So maybe teams like have a CNAP or they have some amazing tooling and workflows, but if it's not actually tested in under real conditions, then you don't actually know if actually there's a gap here or, there's gaps in the security posture that threat actors might look to leverage. So that's one issue, is probably a lack of validation of the actual controls are working. It's like when you take backups. Like, it's great we've got a backup, but then you also need to test the restore and make sure it actually works. Kind of related to that, I think, is for any validation that is done, any sort of pen test or red teaming, the scope sometimes is so restricted. So a company could be like, okay, we'll have a pen test, but only look at this part here, even if actually it's the whole environment that potentially is exposed, and the attack surface is much more than that. And that's really what leads some people to saying the term pink teaming instead of red teaming. So red team, obviously threat actors don't have a scope. They can do what they want, whereas red teams, pen testers are a lot more constrained by what's actually allowed by the company. Probably just a third point to mention on that would be, it's fine to implement a tool like a CNAP or implement various controls internally. And if you're a defender, you maybe have a list of things that you're thinking of, which is fine.
Yeah.
I think where it kind of things can fall through the cracks a little bit is that the defenders often lack a kind of hacker mindset, let's say, where they can actually think, if a defender is able to think like the threat, essentially, think like a threat actor, how would I leverage this kind of, after gaining situational awareness, how could I leverage these resources here? How could these controls potentially be bypassed? And I think if more defenders had this kind of hacker mindset, that would definitely improve security in general.
It's interesting that you said these points. Now, I would like to understand from your point of view, from your very own perspective, would you say this is more of a tooling problem, mindset issue, or a skills gap? So would you think this kind of problem, what do you think is it more about? Your person.
I'm gonna personally sit on the fence.
Yes.
And I'm gonna say it's all three. So it's a mindset issue whereby if a defender doesn't know that they should, that thinking like the threat could actually help their defensive work, they're not going to invest in their skills in that area. Okay. And I think also you mentioned tooling. Is it a tooling issue? Yeah, as well, because sometimes we can be very reliant on our CNAP, on various kind of tooling to find vulnerabilities or misconfigurations in the environment. But these tools aren't perfect. Like, for example, if you run, let's say in Entra and Azure, really Microsoft 365 and Entra, if you run Scuba Gear, which is like a tool to do a configuration review on this environment, it doesn't take into account Azure subscriptions and the fact that any Entra user by default is able to bring in an Azure subscription and also invite guests. And so, once someone's able to bring in an Azure subscription, then the company actually becomes liable for the cost. And so you can imagine crypto mining or voice call scamming infrastructure and stuff like that. So it's knowing the tool limitations and not just relying purely on the tools, but supplementing that with manual checks informed by a different perspective of how a threat actor would think.
Well, that's very insightful and very interesting thought to learn about how the infrastructures actually fall apart. So it's a lot. I think it's a mixture all the time.
Yeah.
It's always should be a good blend of technology plus human skills.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. You're 100%. Yeah.
Now, you've worked closely with both attackers and defenders. From what you are seeing today, what's the most underestimated risk in cloud and SaaS environments?
Okay, and you're right. We do work with offensive security professionals and defenders, and it's great to see both perspectives. I've personally also been pen tester. I'm still a pen tester now with the assessments that Pwn Labs does, and I've been a security engineer as well. So this kind of purple mindset is very interesting. But in terms of what is actually kind of underestimated in cloud and SaaS environments, I'd say it's this personally. So my 2 cents is, from an unauthenticated perspective, I think it's really underestimated generally how much information we can get about someone's cloud environment. So let's say you had an AWS environment, okay? You have a website, and that website hosts some files on a public S3 bucket, let's say. So from knowing this, I can check the source code and have a look at the S3 bucket. This can tell me the region that you deploy your AWS resources to. It can tell me the AWS account ID that the resource was deployed to. Knowing the AWS account ID, I can then examine the users and the roles and the resources that are existing in your account. Maybe some of those roles can be assumed externally. Maybe some of those resources are accessible. Something else that's worth mentioning is that earlier this year, AWS recently changed something with their error messages. So it used to be like a generic error message before, where it was like, you don't have the ability to access this resource or something like that. Maybe because of AI agents and the Amazon AI agents like struggling with interpreting those messages and deciding what to do next, they've actually made those error messages much more descriptive. So you can now enumerate from an external perspective any resources that you may be able to access. And if you can't access, it will tell you why. And so I think that's like probably from my perspective, the biggest underestimated thing is that even someone who's public on the internet, who has no credentials, no foothold inside your account, they can get a pretty good understanding of your account.
Just to follow up on that, I'd like to know, are we entering a new phase with AI? You mentioned AI.
Yeah.
And AI has been a buzzword since like maybe the last year.
Yeah.
Or maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So now when it comes to when we talk about like how the attackers would think or what the attackers would do you think we are entering a new phase with AI-driven attack paths?
Yeah, amazing question. So undoubtedly, yes. AI capabilities increasing year to year, month to month, week to week. Sometimes it seems like day to day, there's a new capability. And of course, threat actors for sure are using that. We're seeing now, even nation states, to be honest with you. But so the challenges as defenders is kind of twofold the way I see it. One is that you've got all these adversaries who are able to use advanced AI and increasingly advanced AI to gain access to your environment. And that environment is sometimes pretty undefined and huge in terms of if you include all the SaaS environment, the cloud, the on-prem, and everything else. The other kind of issue from a defense perspective is the push to really enable AI in everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's no longer just an exposed web app on the web, potentially. It's like an AI-enabled exposed web app on the web. And so you have this AI agent that has privileged access into your environment, potentially, that has a whole new attack surface in terms of injection attacks, prompt injection, or indirect prompt injection and other attacks. Yeah, the environment keeps on expanding with the explosion and kind of the embedding of AI agents in everything. And as a defender, it's very tricky because your attack surface is expanding the whole time. The ability of medium to high skilled and even low skilled adversaries to perform attacks against your environment is increasing all the time. It's not the best news, but
It's I mean, I was just about to say that AI actually becomes more disturbing. It disturbs your mind all the time because of how it could actually be really advanced or really helpful as a technology. I mean, in general, not just in this in our fields, but
of course,
how it is advanced as a technology, but with its advancements, it's also a lot of disturbing things that it could do.
Of course, yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's like just to put a bit of a positive spin on this as well, I guess. Then, as defenders, we should absolutely look to leverage AI to help protect against these AI threats.
Again, using AI responsibly.
Yeah, using AI responsibly, and if we just take a human approach to try and defend against real-time AI threats that can compromise environments in minutes, it's an unfair game and it's not really going to work. So for sure, in cybersecurity, I don't see us being replaced by AI. I see us being, leveraging the human element and AI to become more effective defenders.
I think what that image gives me is we are the managers of AI.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like in cybersecurity or maybe in the whole information technology field.
Yeah.
Human will not be replaced, but instead we will be managing this whole AI.
We'll be managing this whole AI. You're absolutely right. And it's a strange shift that's happening. I think at this on one end, we're responsible for managing these incredibly powerful tools. On the other hand, we're also trusting these tools with our most important data.
Correct, yes.
And so there's an interesting trade-off there.
So Ian, we have been talking more about the attacker's point of view or the attacker's perspective. Now let's shift, and you've actually mentioned this on the previous question. So if we assume attackers already have valid access, which seems to be reality more often now, as you said as well, how should security teams rethink detection and response?
Interesting. So you're right. I think any nation state has already got lots of persistence in lots of different environments. But if we're just thinking at the company level and the kind of sort of crime groups or threat actors that look to target companies, you're right. A lot of the time that access will already be there, and it'll just be a matter of them trying to increase access, understand the environment almost better than the sysadmins that actually work there sometimes. So how can we really counter this, right? I'd say the assume breach mindset should be the default mindset, right? And many people have been saying this for a very long time, but we shouldn't just assume that we're safe and respond whenever we kind of feel that something's happened. So if you have an assume breach mindset and almost kind of consider the environment to be a potentially hostile environment that you're working with, threat actors that are there, that really informs the design decisions you make in terms of least privilege, in terms of enabling telemetry and logging ahead of time. So I think a lot of the firms who kind of help with instant response encounter a situation where they respond to an incident, they try and help a company triage, expel the threats and recover. But the companies aren't really logging what they need to ahead of time. And so I think from a defender's perspective, we can really make sure we're enabling the right telemetry, we're logging the right things ahead of time. We adopt an assume breach mindset. We implement the principle of least privilege, which is like a basic IT concept, right? It's not like we have to buy a really fancy, shiny appliance to tell us that. We can do that ourselves. And then also, as part of the assume breach mindset, it's also validating your own environment. So if you can actually perform like an assume breach test periodically, or you get a partner to do it, this can help shine a light on some areas. Maybe you didn't have logging for a specific thing that actually a threat actor could use to persist or to escalate privileges. Another good thing about doing assume breach engagements and involving your whole security team is almost in like a crisis simulation event, right? Is that everyone can get threat ready and kind of ready to respond very quickly and know what they have to do when the actual before the actual security breach happens. And invariably it will happen at some point. So yeah, that's probably what I'd say.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, I think that's a wonderful perspective. And I think for my last question, I will make it really practical and relevant. So if you were advising a CISO in the Middle East building cloud security, maybe not just in the Middle East, maybe everywhere in the world.
Sure.
So if you're going to advise a CISO building cloud security capability today, what would you tell them to prioritize and what should they stop doing?
Oh my goodness, that's a tricky question. Thank you for that one.
I thought I'd make it practical.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start by saying that a lot of companies are implementing hybrid cloud architectures and are hybrid multi-cloud architectures rather, and are on some journey from on-premises to hybrid multi-cloud. So I would really advise a CISO to understand the relative merits, the kind of the strong points, the weaknesses of each CSP, AWS, Azure, Entra. Obviously, you have to take business drivers into account. Maybe you have workloads running on GCP for AI and ML, and they're set there, so you have to kind of design the security program around that. But in general, I think having a really good understanding of the relative strengths and weaknesses of each CSP can help inform a design that, or rather an architecture that denies threat actors as much as possible with the quantity and quality of information that can help them to attack your environment. So we can definitely look to architect our environments to try and, from the outside perspective, to be as hard to look at and get into as possible. I would also say it comes down to doing a lot of simple things, right? So like asset management, inventory, least privilege. If you do that, you're at least 50% of the way there to having a secure environment. I think sometimes the temptation is that if we buy X appliance or something like this, we can just have peace of mind and everyone sleeps better. For sure, we can use these incredible appliances to help us, but we shouldn't purely rely on them if we're not doing the basics right at the same time.
Yeah.
And then I guess the final thing I would mention is that I wouldn't chase compliance benchmarks and kind of standards as like the final outcome. Compliance doesn't really mean security. And we see this time and time and again in companies that have been breached. They were compliant and they still got breached. So for sure, compliance standards are part of a framework we can use to evaluate our security posture and something that we use to help us improve. But we really need to focus on actual security as well and make sure we're making improvements in actual security as well as demonstrating compliance to the board or investors and stuff like that.
Would you say, it's just something that came to my mind, like, would you say it's best to secure the basics or the fundamentals first? I mean, is that something, or it's a lot of mix and match of fundamentals, or you have to first secure the fundamentals and then do a complement it with advanced technologies? Is it something you say would be a good strategy for that?
That sounds like a really good strategy. So as a company grows over the years, commercially, they do well, they improve, their environment grows, their revenues grow, hopefully. Then from a security perspective, if you come into a company as a CISO and they're relatively immature, for sure, starting with the basics is going to be tough in terms of maybe changing behaviors that exist in the environment. Politically, it's very easy to find vulnerabilities, but then politically, getting people to fix those issues is much harder, right? But it definitely pays off. If you can have application whitelisting, if you can have proper inventory and asset management, proper change control that actually is informed by security as well, with security sign-off, least privilege, you are going, that is really going to make a big difference to your security posture. I would say then you're ready for kind of a shiny tool that can help you with kind of ongoing management and stuff like that. Of course, you can buy a tool like that to help if you've just got a small team.
Yeah.
And you don't really have someone dedicated on security. Absolutely use a tool such as that to help augment your sysadmins and your cloud engineers to kind of secure the environment. But the really basic stuff it can't be skipped and it needs to be done. So yeah, that's probably what I'd say.
Thank you very much, Ian. It has really been a great discussion, and I thought it was my last question. Now, I think before we leave the audiences, I would like your answer to this. If there is one mindset shift you would want security leaders listening today to walk away with, what would it be?
Good question. So let's kind of make this relevant to AI.
Yeah.
I think probably the mindset shift is don't enable AI in everything. Like, you're going to massively increase your attack surface. And at the same time, try and embed AI in as much as you can with your security workflows, because as humans, we can focus on a lot of the creative stuff. We can architect, we can design, we can look to validate. But for any of the stuff that's maybe a bit tedious or time consuming for us, then absolutely leverage AI there to help make people's jobs easier.
Thank you very much. And once again, thank you for joining us on this
My
podcast.
pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.